we have been working enough with multiplying when there are fractions involved that now I want to start looking at, all right, what do we know about adding fractions, subtracting fractions, and how is multiplying when there's any sort of a fraction involved, how is that different from adding and subtracting? Well, the first thing, when you are adding, you must have common denominators. That means the same size pieces. What about subtracting? Yep, you must have common denominators. So your bottom numbers must be the same. You must have the same size pieces. Multiplying fractions, denominators don't matter. So not common denominators. So that's the first thing to think about. So the denominators, your first step when you add and subtract fractions, you have to look at the denominators. When you are multiplying fractions, you don't have to care about the denominators. When you are adding fractions, does everything have to be a fraction? Nope. You can add whole numbers. Can you subtract whole numbers? Sure. Can subtract whole numbers from fractions. And you can add the whole numbers and fractions. What about multiplying? No. You only multiply fractions. So if you are multiplying, you have to turn everything into a fraction. It could be an improper fraction. Your whole number goes over top of a 1, but you cannot multiply when there are whole numbers involved without changing it to fractions. Now, I say you can't. Technically, you can, but there is a ton of work involved. The example that we did in the jotter yesterday, well, that was fairly reasonable. But when you get into numbers that are not nearly that friendly, you still have to be able to multiply them. And the best way to make sure you do that correctly when you're multiplying the fractions is to have only fractions involved. What about your answers? Well, when you add, you may get improper fractions that must be turned into mixed numbers. So your answer might be an improper fraction. It might be a mixed number and an improper fraction. You have to end up with a mixed number and a proper fraction. So you very often have to do some extra work at the end of adding fractions or mixed numbers. What about subtracting? Well, not so much. But the extra step in subtracting, you must always take a smaller number away from a larger amount, which means you have to sometimes, not all the time, sometimes you have to borrow. And what about when you multiply fractions? Just like when you added fractions, you may get an improper fraction that you must turn into a mixed number and a proper fraction. All right, so we're getting closer to a final answer. One more thing with your answer. Do you have to simplify the fraction? Oh, always. You divide top and bottom by the same number, also known as a common factor. So you have to simplify any fractions involved. What about when you subtract? Do you have to simplify any fractions? Oh yeah, since I wrote once what that means, all I need to do here is write simplify fractions. What about when you multiply? Even after you've turned your improper fraction into a whole number and a proper fraction, you still must simplify the fraction part. Alrighty. This chart right now is in your jotter. If you feel it would be helpful, you might want to transfer it over into your folder, but it should be in your jotter. So yes, I would like you to send me a photograph of this today before you go on to the next video and before you go on to the online practice. Thank you.